Good afternoon. It is 4:30. I'd like to ask that you please join me for a moment of silence, and we'll follow that with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If we get a roll call, please.
Brad Hint. Here. Ken Snyder. Here. Pete Hamill.
Here.
Chantal Ostra. Here. Tom Eggers.
Here. All right, next item up is approval of the agenda. I'll take a motion.
Move to approve the agenda.
Support. Roll call, please.
Snyder.
Aye.
Hamill.
Aye.
Ostra.
Aye.
Eggers.
Aye.
Kent.
All right, we now move into the public forum of session of our meeting. Is there anyone like to address the council at this time? Marv?
Yeah, Marvin Reeson, Sheldon, Iowa. I'm going to speak on the agenda here for the comments on, probably belongs on the bottom. We can't speak at that hearing for this property we're going to make voting on tonight. There's got a lot of confusion there. First, I thought you could speak at that hearing, and then all of a sudden you couldn't. And I see Mr. Bacon on letter that, well, he can, but we can. I believe that this whole thing is nothing but a pure, what you're doing is legal, but it's obviously using the law, I believe, to suppress our freedom of speech, and I take offense to it. It gets worse than that. This idea of having what'd you put that, like a consensus, or making a deal on we could do this or that on a law, I don't know where that's in the books. It's obviously just a shadow thing here to hide Mr. Gale's building that he should be working on out there, which was wrapped up 2.5 years ago and nobody wants to address it. You let it go. And it gets worse. There's not supposed to be any junkyards in town. Right down there at ID, there were 200 tons of steel laying there all bit. You let it go. Depends who they are and who they know. I think things are out of control here. We got to get our city back. Sheldon's a good town. There's a lot of good people here. You got to treat people fairly. As far as this enforcer, we don't need an enforcer. We just need the city employees to do their job. We don't have to pay this guy probably $2,200 a month to go around and tell guys to cut grass and all this other business. That's a lot of money. Put it on other people. Get rid of him. And then they get to find out he lied on the last hearing when he said told that he goes around people and he negotiates with them. Bacon's never got negotiated with him. Not only that, I don't know if he can do that. And he told the council, he lied right to you guys and the public. I take offense to that. I don't think there's any room for that here. Now, somebody accidentally says something, I can understand that. But I think it's time that you start seeing what's going on here. This town is somewhat on fire. There's people quitting their jobs within the city. We got an incident down here in the west end of the town. Somebody finally down there called the EPA in, which should have been done before, because there was a complaint to the city and nothing was done. Health and well-being as a citizen, Sheldon, is important to everybody, no matter what side of town they live on. And it's been completely ignored, by city management included. And that's wrong. It's pure wrong. I hope you guys take heed to some of the stuff I said here tonight. As far as making deals, I think it's wrong. I really do think it's wrong. We're not playing let's make a deal here. And you better start going around all the other parts of town, and don't be afraid to take on the state and look at the mess down there at the old highway nursery. It's a mess. Buildings falling down. However, I do encourage that I still maintain that the leaders of the community should set the example. This thing is headed just like the sidewalk program. As
Mark, you
long
have 15 seconds left.
Okay, as soon as you hit the rich and the influential, they want to start making a deal or switch it to protect themselves. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else that would like to address the council? Okay, I'll allow it.
Most of you probably know me. I'm Robert Davison, or Bob Davison. I'm one of Aaron's neighbors. And this whole thing of his car art out there, I heard a lot of stuff on that first meeting. You know, they're talking about, is the car viable? Does it have lights? You know, it quit being a car a long time ago, but a 57 Chevy is an iconic piece of automotive history. Anybody should know that. Anybody that's been around cars knows what a 57 Chevy is. I think he's done something neat. Like I said before, I told him, it's a good thing Harley Davidsons are too damned expensive, okay? I would probably be doing the same thing. Like I say, everybody's trying to treat it like it's just a junk car, but it's way beyond that. You know, it's a 57 Chevy. Anybody that's ever been around cars can recognize that in a heartbeat. It's not a car, it's a piece of art, and it's part of our history. And I think he's doing something to try and preserve that. So, that's what I got to say. As far as being a neighbor, I don't mind it one bit. And the wildlife running in and out of there, there's a few stray cats in our neighborhood. They really like my deck chairs. They have a collar, one of them has a collar on, so they're not wild animals. So I guess in that heartbeat of things, I'd have to get rid of my chairs on my front porch. They like sunning themselves out there. I don't know who they belong to, but they're there. So, you guys need to look at this car, use that as a quote, you know, differently. It's not a car anymore. It's a piece of art and it's a piece of history. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please step forward, state your name.
Doug Oldenkamp from Sheldon, Iowa. I am kind of a car guy. I guess I'm kind of on that side. I do appreciate art. I do appreciate old cars, and I think it's terrific that somebody wants to bring back to the future what we did back in our days. It's amazing what some of these cars went through and what we had, how much fun we had with them. It's a part of life. It's not just a car. And I believe that he is going to make a good example out of that with lawn art, with waterfalls he's talking about and stuff, and lighting. I think it'll be great. I also have a picture here I'd like to show the council of by my house, north of my house. One of the people that are complaining the most about this lives right next to me. And I'd like to show you the council now, if I may.
Okay, quickly.
This is what my wife looks at out the window when she's in the kitchen. If you guys are married, you know what your wife thinks about looking out the window. Something like that, right? Any woman would be a little upset if she had to look out her kitchen window to look at that. I'm not complaining
Okay,
about that.
can you go back to the mic so we can get this on recorded for YouTube?
I'm not really complaining about that, about the campers being there. I talked to Mark And in the wintertime, he does try to move them back for me so we can see out the window, at least in the wintertime. I don't want to raise a bunch of cane and raise hell with him about, you know, something meteorical like that. It's stupid, I think. Basically, it upsets my wife if she's in the kitchen working. And there's a lot more stuff around town that I really don't want to get into. It's got to, but Marva's right about a lot of things. Trying to think if there's something else I had, but I guess that's about all it is that I have to offer right now. So.
Okay,
Hey?
thank you. Anyone else? Do we have any written comments?
None.
Okay. Then let's move on to the consent agenda. Take a motion to approve that, please.
Make a motion to approve.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Eggers.
Aye.
Kent.
Aye.
Ostra.
Aye.
Hamel.
Aye.
Snyder.
All right, moving on then, we're going to do new business first today. Item 5A is the not to exceed 2.7 million general obligation capital loan note discussion. I'd like to open the public hearing on that now regarding the authorization of a loan agreement and the issuance of notes to evidence the obligation of the city thereunder. Anyone wishing to address the council regarding this matter? Are there any written comments?
No.
Okay. Take a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Take one of those as support. Roll call, please.
Hamel.
Aye.
Snyder.
Aye.
Kent.
Aye.
Ostra.
Aye.
Eggers.
Aye.
Next item then is approval of the resolution instituting proceedings to take additional action. Take a motion for that, please.
So move.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Kent.
Aye.
Eggers.
Aye.
Hamel.
Aye.
Ostra.
Aye.
Snyder.
All right. And then the final item under this point, consider a special council meeting for note issuance. And there was a memo that was emailed today. I trust you all saw that. Is it part of the agenda, updated agenda? Mm-hmm. Okay, it should be on, if you've updated your agenda, it would also be there.
Because I have a question, at what time, when do we need this money, and what time does the interest lock in?
Well, the interest locks in shortly after the S&P ratings call when we get the bond rating. The estimated interest rate now is 4%, and that's not expected to change much. We wouldn't be able to, the idea is the certification of the TIF debt really should happen before December 1. We need the money by January, which is when we go out for bid. When are we going out for bid? Third week of January. So we really don't need the money until the third week of January. But having it in hand before then is required, and you might as well have it before December 1 so that you can certify the TIF debt. And we don't expect the interest rates to change a whole lot if we close in November.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So,
Yeah,
as far
I have a
as-
question
go
for
ahead.
Todd. Todd, why are we waiting until January to rebid?
This isn't a rebid.
Don't hear it.
This isn't a rebid, this is Western Avenue bid.
Okay,
Yeah, and that's got DOT, that's got federal money in it, so we have to bid with the DOT bid letting. And we will, to meet all their deadlines, as soon as we can do that, saying it's January 22 of 25.
okay. That explains it, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, to Sam, what's the risk of the December 3rd approval or release of the TIF versus December 1?
It's fairly low, but there is a risk. There's two risks. One is the S&P ratings call, and it's a relatively small point that hasn't come up before. And the other is maybe a bigger risk would be if, you know, there's legislative changes to the urban renewal law. You run into some potential issues there.
We know what those changes are for the coming year, correct?
No.
When would they be instituted into law if they were to act on them? December 1?
Well, if you don't certify December 1 of this year, you wouldn't be able to certify TIF debt until December 1 of next year, and there's a legislative
So
session
December
between.
1 is the last date that we can certify
It's an annual
for next year.
It's an annual certification, yep.
It's a deadline.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, the risk is relatively low, but because there is one, the advice that we've received is to wrap it up now.
Anyone else? All right, do you have a suggestion as far as date based on comments you've received back?
Not quite yet. I heard from 3 members that any of the 3 dates would work, and then another, I think Brad suggested that Monday would work for him if he was out by 5, and that would work. I think that'd be better than a Friday meeting.
That would work.
This meeting will be just to approve
Yes.
the funding? So it shouldn't be a long meeting?
No.
Okay.
Should be just a few minutes.
Based on that, I'm going to suggest Monday then as our special council meeting date. Everyone's in agreement, but you want a motion for that, or can we just take that by my directive?
Yeah, have we approved the resolution?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I by consensus is fine if everyone's in agreement.
Okay.
What is that date, Larry? I don't remember which date
What was
is
the
Monday.
date? You said?
October 28th.
Thank you.
Yeah, Monday the 28th.
And is that at 4:30?
Yes. All right, so that takes care of everything there. Then let's move into the item 6A, consideration of code enforcement action at 523 10th Street. First item up is findings. Who's going to address that? Anyone?
If I might.
Yes.
Micah, would you mind laying out the procedures for us on the findings?
Under the city code, chapter 50, section 6, subsection 3, you've had your hearing. That was on September 4, so at this time, the council's first question is, and this is a finding for the council to make, is whether or not a nuisance exists. So that's your first step. Second step is if you do find that a nuisance exists, what you, the council, deem to be the appropriate method of abatement. Obviously, if you find that no nuisance exists, you don't need to discuss abatement. And as stated in the code, your findings are conclusive, meaning there's not an appeal, for instance, to Board of Adjustment or the Planning Commission or something like that.
Okay.
So based on the record before you, which is what was presented September 4, both by the property owner by Mr. Hallgren, through public comment. That's the evidence you have in front of you.
Before we go into further discussion, I would like to go on record, and I've been corresponding with Micah, and I would like to say this to get the discussion started. The thing that troubles me with the ordinance is that it's pretty narrow in its definition. By definition, it's a junk vehicle. However, repurposing is a popular method of using something in an entirely new way, and Aaron provided some examples. In the pictures he provided in the packet he distributed. An old bed frame being used as a flower box, a wringer washer serving as a planter, an antique headboard repurposed as a trellis. Taking a portion of an old car body and transforming it into a water fountain, complete with landscaping, puts this junk vehicle, in my mind, in an entirely new category. There were plenty of other pictures of junk vehicles in the packet, and it's not hard to differentiate between the two. Those who signed the letter of support in the packet could tell the difference. The supporters who spoke in favor of the project at the council meeting get it. And the letter of support from his neighbor, Bob Davison, who is with us today, probably stated it best where he wrote, according to the code, with the description of a junk vehicle, a junk or junk vehicle, Aaron has moved beyond that description. I'm not sure at this point how to remedy the situation, and responding to Aaron with a flat no does not seem fair to me when only a couple of neighbors have registered a complaint, while many others have come out in support of the project. Granted, not all those that came out in support were neighbors, but the majority was overwhelming in his favor. One of the council members has suggested the abatement process and work through it that way. And I think that's a viable option. I would like you to consider that as a possibility at this time. So I will open it up now for further comments or questions.
You could still go through the process of going to the Board of Adjustments to ask for that vehicle to be placed on his yard as landscaping, correct? Is that another option he can do?
Micah, you want to address that?
I'll do my best, and I'll need a little help from the city staff. But keep in mind that you're here on this issue under the city code, the code of ordinances, as opposed to a zoning issue, which would be under the zoning ordinance, okay? Variances are for things like setbacks, type of structures in certain districts, and, you know, special, well, not special uses, that's a whole nother category, but those are the zoning type of issues that are properly before the Board of Adjustment. I am not aware, as I sit here and think about it, of a zoning code provision that in the City of Sheldon's zoning code allows a property owner to request a variance to allow what could be categorized as a junk vehicle to be made into something else, okay? Now, if there was, for instance, a question about fence height or other site regulations that fall squarely within the zoning code, those are potential items that could be addressed by the Board of Adjustment through a variance process. But I'm not aware of a variance procedure that would be on point for this particular issue. And if there's someone that believes I'm misspeaking, go ahead and correct me, but I'm not aware of such a provision.
I just seen if there was another avenue.
I think that would require a legislative change, if you will, under our existing codes to allow for that. And yeah, we don't have that legislation proposed or in front of us at this point.
Other questions or comments?
for the last 2 weeks, I've been struggling with this greatly, and I have a lot of the same thoughts as what Greg does. My daughter recently did a whole project in school on recycling and reusing things, and so I don't know. I struggle because if you look at code, it would be considered a nuisance. It is junk or junked vehicle, but what does it look like going forward as far as abatement goes? Because my understanding is we have 2 steps here, correct? Like,
You're correct.
we need to decide whether or not it's a nuisance and then decide what abatement looks like.
If you decided that it was a junk vehicle, you have discretion within the second step to order what type of abatement, okay? Let's say, for instance, the question before the council was a dilapidated house, and it was found to be a nuisance. The council, if it was in a similar setting as you're here today, could order abatement through repair of certain items within a certain period of time. Or the council could order abatement through demolition and removal. Okay? Abatement isn't confined to just one particular thing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So in this situation, the abatement options could take into consideration time and various activities, but all of them being directed at eliminating, if you find a nuisance, the nuisance in some manner.
Right now, the way our code is, what you said, and I think we all agree, we all consider, in this situation it is, at this point, a junk vehicle. What they're saying is they're going to do other things with it, like the waterfall and lights and whatever, which makes it a lawn ornament and decoration, landscaping. Is that... Well, the waterfall, we're in northwest Iowa. That only lasts 5-6 months, if we're lucky, and I hope we're lucky. So we've got to decide, is that enough to bend it out of the nuisance? But I hate to say it, but the way we have to do something, because the way it looks right now, the car, according to our ordinance, so the abatement, if we find the nuisance, is that right? The waterfall and the lights, that's not enough to get it out of the category.
You're not going to find a specific answer to your question in the code. Like,
Right.
if you make
That's
it
what I'm
into a
saying,
waterfall, or if you put one coat of colored paint on it or something, it becomes not a nuisance. But you, as the council, have some discretion, again, to order what the abatement is and what it would take, per your findings, to move it from one category to the next.
So if I'm correct, we're here at this point because someone complained about it. Is that correct? And through that complaint, we followed up, Steve followed up, and his findings was that it fell underneath this ordinance, and therefore everything else we've been discussing has fallen out from that. So if someone wouldn't have complained about it, we wouldn't be here talking about it. Is that correct? In other words, I'll take you off spot a little bit here, Steve. If the person who complained about it was to, if the party who wants to do this went to them, showed them exactly what they were going to do, and they rescinded their complaint, do we have an issue? We have an issue because it's already been claimed as a piece of junk, or do we?
Just because somebody complained isn't the deciding factor on whether or not something is a nuisance, right? And we do some code compliance checks, but we don't go out all day, every day. And I'm not guaranteeing we catch every code compliance. So just because Mr. Holgren or Todd or Sam didn't see it one day doesn't mean we don't see it another day. Not everything we do is complaint based. A lot of what we do is complaint based, but not everything. So to say it wouldn't be a problem if there wasn't a complaint, I think is not correct.
So getting the complaints approval of the final project would not take care of what we're trying to deal with here today. Okay. So the only way that, in my mind then, if that's not an avenue, is that the ordinance has to take into consideration yard art. And today that is not in the writings of the ordinance as it stands today. What process is available to get the ordinance changed so that it could become an exception? I'm assuming there's a process.
You're asking the process to change the code?
Yeah, what's
Well,
the process
we have...
to modify the code?
Zoning code and city code. Both of them have, are ordinances, and so they require proposals, and they require a certain number of readings and notices that are involved in making the change, okay? That is how ordinances are amended, added, repealed, etc. Now keep in mind that inherent in enforcement and in nuisances, dangerous buildings, junk vehicles, etc., it is nearly, if not certainly, impossible to draft legislation that can contemplate every scenario, okay? So when you have legislation, and I'm sorry to get a little bit abstract and philosophical, but I've been thinking about this quite a bit. When you have legislation, it draws a line. That line is necessarily arbitrary because, again, we cannot contemplate every situation. And that line, you're going to have things that happen coming from either direction, maybe the nuisance direction, maybe in this case the art direction, and there's going to be a gray area. And the question becomes, does the city want legislation that errs on the side of limiting more junk-type vehicles and thus allowing less art? Or does it want to err on the side of allowing more art, but then that's necessarily probably going to let in more junk vehicles? And so you can keep trying to move the line, but you're always going to have a gray area. And in that gray area is where discretion needs to be exercised, and there is no magic wand, there's no specific recipe, there's no exact formula for how to exercise discretion. But that's what you're being asked to do. And this case just highlights that the law is an imperfect, pardon the pun, vehicle for solving every problem. So, you could change the legislation, but I suspect that in time, that change legislation will invite a new problem for you to solve.
So with that said, what would it take for a person to initiate a proposal, a viable proposal to modify the ordinance?
Well, text amendments on the zoning code can come from planning and zoning or the council or city staff. From the Code of Ordinances, staff can recommend or the council can ask that it be considered, and it would have to go through the process. So you could, for instance, at some time make a motion that you would like X, Y, and Z to be a new or revised ordinance and then it would go through the channels
Could
for
a,
ultimate approval by this council.
could a citizen petition to have it changed?
Let me be very careful about that. Could a petition be presented? Certainly. Does the council necessarily have to act on a petition in the sense of like a legal referendum where if you get a certain number of votes, you have to do it? We don't have that. So certainly people can ask for different laws or legislation to be considered. I mean, that's happened with some other hot button issues over the years that we don't have to necessarily name.
I think there might be a simpler way to do this, and here's my suggestion. If we decide that it is a junk vehicle, we declare it a junk vehicle, and by code, I think we have to. But in our if we issue an abatement, we could, in that abatement, tell Aaron that the vehicle, per his plan, needs to be transformed from a vehicle into a non-junk vehicle. It's no longer a vehicle with the waterfall and the flowers around the landscaping. It's not a vehicle anymore in my mind. It's a non-junk vehicle. It's not a junk vehicle anymore. And if he complies with it and does as he has indicated he wants to do this project, he meets the requirements that we as a council have laid down in the abatement, and he can have it. That's my suggestion. But then you'd have to decide, is that transformation, does that change it into a non-junk vehicle? That's the question you have to answer in your head if you're going to, in order to vote on this. Any holes in that?
That is an option that is before this council.
Okay.
To say abate by making, if you say it's a nuisance because it's a junk vehicle, you have the option of saying abate it by making it not a junk vehicle. And then at the end of the abatement period, a decision will have to be made about whether or not that has happened. And incidentally, typically that wouldn't automatically come back to council.
It would or would not?
Would not.
So hypothetically, if someone brought in an old combine, stuck it in their front yard and had a waterfall coming out of it, after we would make such a decision, would that be yard art? Would they be subject to nuisance?
What if they came with the what?
Came with a combine, really large piece of implement that didn't work anymore, would normally be considered junk.
You're asking if it's a slippery slope we're going on.
What I'm saying is the challenge I think we have here is where do we put limits to this? And I think that's the challenge we're all trying to wrestle with, in and outside of, procedure. If I'm going to build a garage 10 feet off of my lot line, I've got an avenue I can go through to find out whether I can do that. Right now, yard art, we don't have a definition for yard art, and we don't have any legislation that tells us what we can do or can't do with that. And so I'm sitting here sympathetic to the situation, but to make a decision, I don't really have anything other than the ordinance the way it reads right now to fall back on. And
Michael, last week you said, somebody suggested, and you said, no matter what, it is still a vehicle or a car. You made some kind of statement in that it's still a vehicle. Do you remember?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
There was something, and I don't remember the whole statement, but you said I'll put the word bottom line in. It's still a vehicle.
I'm sorry, I don't recall that particular comment.
Any other questions or comments?
If I might.
Yes, sir.
So I know this has become somewhat of a charged issue, but here's a path that you could consider. There hasn't been much discussion about the exceptions in the ordinance in 51.04. And I'll just briefly read them. One is a structure or a garage, and a garage or other enclosed structure which you can't put in a front yard. So that's probably out. Salvage yard doesn't apply. Fence or wall, and this does. So you can't put a 6-foot fence in a front yard, but you can put a 6-foot fence in a side yard, and because it says 6 feet in height in 51.04 Part 3. So one path that you could do is you could declare it as a nuisance. You could negotiate, and yes, I said the word negotiate because this business is about negotiation when you're negotiating timeframes, but you could theoretically negotiate a 30-day removal and ask for it and say that it could be removed to the inside or interior of an enclosed fence on the property that's 6 feet that complies with the fence permit. And then the city could initiate a rule change either in the Code of Ordinances or in the zoning code. Zoning code would require the extra step on the front end of the Planning Commission, but it would also give you the extra step of an appeals process with the Zoning Board of Adjustment on the back end, because if you change the rules to be similar to Sanborn, which by the way has a code similar to what Aaron's asking for, but only applies to commercial property, it doesn't apply to residential, you would still have the issue of having a quote, non-accessory building in your front yard, or a non-accessory structure in your front yard that wouldn't meet the 25-foot setback, and that would have to go to the Board of Adjustment. And then if you send something like that to the Board of Adjustment, then it wouldn't have to come to the council. But again, you would have the extra step on the front end of that code writing process that would involve the Planning Commission. So again, to reiterate, you could find it a nuisance, negotiate a time frame for a removal, remove it, he could remove it to within inside a fence, he wouldn't have to do anything to it, it could be inside of a fence and it wouldn't be seen, and then you could initiate a rule change, and if the city initiated the rule change, you could use the resources of me and Todd and Steve and Micah to draft that ordinance. And we probably would take Sanborn's and tailor it somehow, and probably require a hearing or a special exception if you wanted to put something like that in the front yard in a residential zone. So that's a potential path forward. And I need to remind everybody too that, to the point that was made earlier about the complaint versus not complaint, I saw it right away and I wrote, I knew it was a violation, but I decided not to I decided there was other issues more serious, and I wasn't going to exercise my discretion unless I was asked to deal with it, and I was asked to twice. It came up. There was 2 complaints from 2 different citizens. One came through a council member, and one came to the city office. So that's where we are.
And the problem that we're dealing with is it's a subjective matter. Art, what's art to you might be different from what art is to me. And I guess the thing that I wonder is, at what point would this project become a fountain that maybe looks like a car? Has some car features, okay, as opposed to a car that happens to have a fountain. And I don't know what that is, okay, but at some point, because Aaron did provide some examples of how we might accomplish that, and some of them, it really doesn't look necessarily so much like a car, it's a fountain that has car features. I don't know if that makes any sense, and we're probably going to take heat no matter what we do, but is that a possibility?
Okay, so to move things forward, while I very much appreciate your creativity, I do feel we need to find it as a nuisance and then move forward with what abatement looks like.
You want to break it up and make a motion on your first part?
Yes, I make a motion that we find this as a nuisance.
Okay.
Support.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Ostra,
Aye.
Hess,
Aye.
Snyder, Eggers,
Aye.
Hamel,
Aye.
All right. We have a nuisance. It has been declared a nuisance. And so the next step is to discuss the abatement process, correct?
That is correct.
In order to make it art, we have to change all the ordinances, and that's gonna be 6 months to a year.
We have to change the ordinance?
If we do a yard art, I mean, you're gonna have to change some ordinances, unless you cut it way down.
Well, and some of his examples, a couple of them are, there's just basically the trunk, the whole rest of the car is gone. It almost looks like to me that's a fountain that has some car features.
Well, yes. If you wanna allow exceptions, then you gotta change the ordinance.
Or spell it out in the abatement process that he transforms it into a non-junk vehicle.
Then we'll be doing it case by case, down the road.
Right. So a question I have, I'm going to go back to building a building outside of my existing parameters on my property. I can come to the zoning committee and I can ask for a variance. And part of that process, if I am correct, is that they will solicit my neighbors within 200-foot radius, correct? That is correct, okay. And if there's no complaints, then the committee then makes a decision on whether or not they accept the variance or they don't, correct?
Complaints are a factor but not determinative. If you look at the Board of Variance chapter, there are some very specific factors that they have to make a finding on before they can grant a variance. Are they well known? They are not, but they are very clear on what findings need to be made, and it's not simply did someone object or not.
So if the committee feels that it does not, they're not, you know, the request is not egregious to that criteria, then everyone around, all the neighbors complain about it, they could still provide the variance.
Yes, because, again, sorry to be philosophical, but part of the law that goes back hundreds of years is from our American standpoint, is that it's intended in large part to protect minority interests as opposed to majority interests, right? Because majorities always have the vote, so to speak. So what protects the so-called little guy? Well, often the law, because maybe not everybody wants that variance, but there's a particular reason for that property, with no fault to the property owner, that it merits having a variance. So I won't go further on that, but it's not just about how loud the voices are in the room.
Good. Well, I appreciate that. That's the kind of feedback I'm looking for on this. So what we would probably have to identify is what are these criteria that the committee, in this case probably the council at this point, would have to consider in order to approve or not approve yard art. And that's where I feel I don't have the data in front of me to determine what that criteria is. And And that's where I fall short of doing anything outside what's already in place. Now, if someone can provide that and petition to have that utilized within a modification of a certain ordinance for an exception, then it sounds to me like we've got something that we can actually identify and decide whether we approve it or we don't approve it. But right now, we don't have that criteria. I don't think any of us have that criteria on what yard art is or isn't, except our own opinion.
I don't think there's a committee in the world that can answer that.
May not be. But
Back to
if,
Sam's idea,
huh?
going back to Sam's idea about the backyard, what is the difference between the front yard and the backyard?
The difference is that under your city code, it builds in exceptions. It says thou shalt not have junk unless it's in an enclosed structure or behind a 6-foot fence in the right place. So it's not 100% prohibition.
What is your willingness for that?
I think what Sam was saying, as I heard it, was one of your options is, now that you've found it, it's a nuisance, abate the nuisance by removing it from your yard or ensuring that it falls within one of the enumerated exceptions. That's an option. It's not your only option, but that's an option.
And that is an option that we have used before. And there was a situation on Western Avenue where there was a lot of vehicles parked outside, obviously not art, nor was there an attempt to turn them into art, but the compromise ended up being putting up a 6-foot fence. You could still see some of the vehicles above it, but it's really worked out well, and the neighbors are satisfied with that solution.
From a personal point of view, I mean, I don't want to offend my neighbors, number one, but at the same time, it is my property, but if I wasn't, I would feel comfortable doing that, and that would eliminate all the arguments, That's just, if I was in that case, then what I would do, and that takes care of the whole issue.
We need to move forward somehow, so somebody's gonna have to make a motion, or we're gonna have to table it and come back to it again, which I really don't wanna do. We could be here till 8 o'clock tonight, going back and forth on this roundabout.
Is it up to us to make suggestions, or just
Yes.
us?
Yes,
Yep.
city council.
There've been options that have been thrown out as possibilities. It's, wherever you stand, or if you have a better idea, we would also entertain that, but we need to move forward somehow, either by tabling it or making a motion to deal with it.
I don't think tabling it's gonna change down the road, 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
We're not gonna have any more data by that time.
I think we have to give him, 30 days, and if he wants to come back with a plan in the future, with a revised version of it, I guess he can. or he can do number 3. I mean, there's options out there.
Number 3 being what? I don't have it.
He could put in an enclosed fence in his backyard. Ask for a variance. That's an option.
If I
And
might.
what does it look like to change the zoning code, what you were mentioning? What does that all entail? Like timeline and everything?
Well, to change the zoning code, you have a draft ordinance, you publish a hearing notice, and then you go to the planning commission. And obviously that affects the entire zoning code, so not one particular property. So we wouldn't notice a particular neighborhood, we would notice the whole city in the newspaper. It's the normal hearing process. Planning commission makes their findings and decides if they're going to recommend it. And then it can come to the city council for up to 3 readings. And then the Board of Adjustment would be the one that would consider it hardship. If you go with the exception that's in the code now, in the regular code of ordinances, no variance would even be needed if it's a 6-foot fence that meets the fence permit requirements and it's inside the fence.
We're talking in the backyard.
In the backyard.
If you change the ordinance, though, something else will come down the road. Like I said, you're not gonna cover every issue every time.
The inverse is also true, because there are situations around town that have not been dealt with as, whether it's junk or junk vehicles. There are other ones around town, and some of those were pictured. Neighbor dispute between 2 people, and they can register a complaint, and then we deal with it again that way. So,
And if I might?
yes.
And that's where it becomes so difficult, because the couple of the examples at the previous meeting, one we did send a letter to, and I'd been in communication with that person previously too, regarding a number of vehicles. Currently, they're all, one of the things that we have said in our letter, past letters, is you got one of them on blocks. Well, now it's on tires and it's licensed and it's on a paved surface, so it's in compliance. The phone that was passed around tonight with the picture, that was a picture of a camper on a concrete slab. It's in compliance with the code. So, if you look at other situations, there's situations all over town that are grandfathered in. I have an 8-foot rock wall in my backyard right on the property line that was built in 1916. And it's been there for a long time. And if it was knocked down by a tornado, it wouldn't be take quite a tornado to knock it down, but it wouldn't be a compliant wall anymore. I think people like the wall. I like the wall. So I'm open to finding a solution here. We could potentially take the Sanborn code and tailor it to have a hearing, but you'd still have to find a hardship, and Aaron might be told, look, you're not really able to articulate a hardship for having a waterfall car in your front yard. Why don't you move it to the side? And if you're going to tell him that the solution is to move it to the side, he can move it into the side tomorrow after he gets a fence permit and builds a fence, but he can move it into the side and build a waterfall, or he can just leave it as is inside the fence, and we're done. So do you want to go through all the effort to change the code? Because if you change the code citywide, you may have some other comments that come through the process that you weren't prepared for, which is, by the way, what happened with the chicken ordinance discussion. Sorry to bring it up, but it became the things that we hadn't thought about before, like how do you tell, a baby chicken whether it's a rooster or not? How do you figure out whether you're going to allow guineas and other types of fowl, right? And it ended up going into the too hard box. But you walked into that process, if you remember, you petitioned that ordinance and asked me and staff to work on it. We did, and it was a great discussion, and it went through the process, and you ended up listening to all the input and deciding no. And that could happen if you initiate a text amendment.
So,
I
for the
came
sake,
in,
oh, go ahead.
no, I came in at the end, I came in, my first meeting was the no vote. Because I didn't know anything else before, so I'll believe you.
So there's lots of things to sort out, and it's gonna take time. There's great ideas, great avenues to go down for a different route, but we still need to get to the end of the chase, and my suggestion is have 30 days to get rid of the car. And then we can go down the road and figure out all the other stuff down the road. 'Cause that ain't gonna, it's gonna take longer than 30 days.
Are you suggesting that as a motion?
So I would make that a motion.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have support?
I'll support it.
Any further discussion?
And that would give him enough time to petition, like, to get a fence permit or do whatever to petition that.
He wouldn't need a petition for a fence permit. It'd be a $25 permit if he meets the requirements, and Steve and I could process that within a few days. Just have to do a one utility locate. That's up to him.
Brad is saying get rid of the car in his motion, not?
Yes.
That, how does that allow for room, if he's saying get rid of the car, what?
You'd have to move it into the backyard if
You'd
it's
have to
in
move
closed
it
fence.
from that point.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
an option under,
Under the
Move
code.
the car off the front,
Exception.
get rid of the car off the front yard.
Yeah.
Right. He'd have to
Okay,
move the
all
car
right.
somewhere
Okay,
legally.
all right. So we have motion, we have support. Any other comments? Everyone know what you're voting on? You want to hear the motion?
So we're it's just remove the car,
30 days, remove the car,
and we're not gonna look into anything else.
and then they can figure out if they wanna come back or go through the number 3 and the exceptions. 'Cause otherwise, we're gonna be here all day. We're gonna be here all night, we're gonna be here next week, next meeting. We're not gonna come to a compromise. And if we wanna change the code, that's gonna take many meetings to do. You got planning and zoning in there, you've gotta come back to the council. Like I said, that's 6 months out.
All right, I'm going to call for the question. Roll call, please.
Eggers,
Aye.
Ostra,
I
Hint,
Aye.
Hamel,
Aye.
Snyder,
Aye.
All right. That's all under A, correct? If I'm reading this correctly?
Yes. We're on 6B now.
Yep. Moving on to considering strategic planning options. First thing up is a recommendation from the SEDC. Tanya, you want to speak to that?
Tanya Herrera with the Sheldon Chamber and Development Corp. I am presenting a recommendation from our SEDC Executive Committee to move forward with Tim Mormon's proposal for strategic planning for both City of Sheldon and for the Sheldon Chamber and Development Corp. I would just like to note that the SEDC has not had a formal vote from our full board to move forward with this proposal, but this is a recommendation being presented to both parties. Also with that, I would like to note that even even though the city of Sheldon and the SCDC plan to work together for several parts of the strategic planning process because of overlapping priorities, that everyone involved will ensure that the city of Sheldon's and the SCDC's priorities are both addressed. Thank you.
Any question for Tanya? Okay. All right. Then let's move on to discussion and/or selection. Anything you want to say before we start? Okay. Any comments from the council?
No, the SCD executive board met last week, and I was part of that, and they felt Tim's was a good offering.
The cost of this one again, how much?
It was 6,000, right?
Okay. And that would be split, or that's the city's tab, or?
Trying to remember how it happened in 2019. I think the city just picked up the cost, but it's been 5 years. I think both parties would be okay either way. So.
Why don't we just agree that we follow the same protocol we did in 2019?
As far as paying for it?
However the cost was
Yeah.
distributed, yeah.
Okay.
We'll look that up.
Okay. Any other comments?
So that's this recommendation is per his quote to us then, as far as the work completed then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the one linked to the agenda.
So then, we need a motion then to approve moving forward with this then.
I move that we move forward with the proposal from Tim. What's his last name?
Tim Mormon.
Yep.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion?
For a cost of $6,000.
Okay. You're fine with that add-on? Pete? With that add-on?
That's fine.
Okay. All right. Roll call, please.
Ostra?
Aye.
Eggers?
Aye.
Snyder? Hamel?
Aye.
Kent?
All right, moving on. Any comments, further comments from you, Sam?
I do. I have just a couple of comments. If you take a look at my city manager's report, there's a couple of things that I'd like to highlight, and then also something that is not on the report but is linked under the FYI section. The deadline to apply for individual FEMA assistance is in a couple of weeks. We encourage everyone to apply regardless of how much loss you have and regardless of whether you had an insurance claim or not. Obviously, you have to disclose your insurance claim to FEMA, but I am aware of numerous situations where people received substantial insurance payments and also received some FEMA assistance if they had substantial damage, especially 2 or 3 inches of sewage in the basement. And this is so important because if you go through the FEMA process, which really isn't that difficult, and I can help you if you need it, or point in the right direction. If you go through that process, then you can write off the uncovered losses on your income taxes because it was declared as a federal disaster area. I know I've said this a number of times, but there's going to be somebody that forgot to apply, and they'll come on the 23rd, and it'll be too late. Second thing is, we are removing a number of unsafe trees. We do have the tree planting moratorium in place for the city rights of way that started last fall. We do ask people to comply with that. I had, this is probably going to come up. We don't have to discuss it tonight, but we have that ordinance that's in place for another 4 years, and then the moratorium expires. So it's something that we're going to need to be thinking about as a permanent solution for this, and the permanent solution is to extend the moratorium to make it permanent, to lift it and establish some sort of a process, which Todd and I are both concerned with because there's some significant issues there. And then, so that just want to remind everybody on that. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is I linked Steve Halgren's report under FYI, and his code enforcement report from September. And if you look at all that he is doing, not just the code enforcement, but all the permits, Todd and I are not. We just do not have the bandwidth to do all of this, and we still are very involved in the permitting process. But it works a lot smoother having Steve involved. I'm very grateful for his help. He helps us and a couple of other smaller communities. So I just want to take a moment to thank him for this. And there was a comment made earlier, and I'm not going to get into it fully, but code enforcement is about negotiation. It is about compassion. It is about trying to find solutions. I'm aware of one real quick example where there was a citizen that had lost their child in Afghanistan, and they had a property in Sheldon that was a mess. And I knew the story, and so I reached out to them and negotiated a solution. And it was far beyond the 5 days that was required in the code. And then I spoke to the neighbors, hey, here's what's going on. Would you work with us on this? And so it is about a give and take. And it is about trying to find solutions. So I want to thank you, Steve, for your efforts. So that's all I have.
All right. Sam, to piggyback on Sam's discussion about FEMA, if anybody has any questions, wants to talk to FEMA, they're at the hardware store. They'll be there tomorrow. Yes, they've been there the last 2 days answering questions. There's been some people that never filed a claim before, filed a claim with them.
So they are taking new claims too?
Yep.
Okay.
Any questions, anything you need to know, they're there to answer questions.
That wasn't real clear in the communication about why they were there.
Yep.
So I'm glad you added that.
Todd, anything from you?
Yes, sir. Just a couple things. I'll go back to FEMA, but this side I'll talk on the city side of FEMA. So Angie and I had our first phone call meeting with our FEMA representative and our Iowa Homeland Security representative. We have a second meeting coming up with them on October, 16th, something like that, Ange. And we will have Jennifer Mulball with Simmering and Corey involved with us there too. So we're going to start putting cost estimates in and see what they'll approve, see what they won't, and then we'll also start working on those 2 mitigation projects that I've talked to you about. One is the North Fifth Lift Station, and the other one is, we'll see if they agree to it or not, but potentially a second water line out to NCC to try to help that situation from ever happening again. So, second thing, Oak Street paving. The main line paving went in yesterday, so they'll start working on now the tie-ins, the intersections, driveways, sidewalks, so on and so forth. Got a little time left, but the job site looks a whole lot different after the paving went down, and I think it's created actually a little bit of excitement in the neighborhood. So that's good because they've been going through some pain. Dakota Mainstem, you had approved our application, us applying to Dakota Mainstem. They did accept us as a member, so there'll be some more information coming. Our next step will be appointing a board member and an alternate. We'll bring that back to you when the time is right. And then Sam mentioned trees, and I just want to bring it up again. So, prior to this year, we worked on park trees. We did some trees on the trail, some trees that maybe weren't as visible as what's about to happen. So there's around 80 trees in the right-of-ways marked right now that are already contracted out for removal. Just so you know, I finished up with Lyle Frohline's assistant the next list to go. There's 204 trees on that list. That list will be going out for pricing here in the next few weeks. And I'll be asking contractors to get those removed by June of 2025. So just know there'll be around 300 trees coming out of the right-of-way over the next few months here. So
Is there more beyond that, Todd?
there is
How many?
probably another 200 after that yet.
Before we say we're done?
Yeah, yeah. Now, the list, the first 80 was primarily ash trees, with just a couple of gnarly maples in there. The list of 200 is primarily ash trees, but there are a few maples and others in there. There's a list of about, and just so people realize we're not tree butchers, we have a list of about 100 ash trees in the right-of-way yet that we still have marked as good, right? So we're not taking them out because they look fine yet. Now we'll see what they look like in a year or two. The ones we're taking out, if you really look at the marks, they're dying, or they're dead, or they're showing huge signs of stress. So maybe we'll have to take out that other 100 ash trees, but I'm not optimistic that that's the case. So.
Is there a point, Todd, to where there's a number of trees that we could actually have the process to save? I mean, where it would make sense to go ahead and treat them versus cutting?
In my opinion, it is too late in Sheldon to treat ash trees. That's solely my opinion, but based on what I have heard from others, there are a few people treating. There's one resident, actually 2 residents in town that have chosen, that I'm aware of, that have chosen to treat their ash trees, and they started some time ago, and they've made us aware of that, and we have those marked on another list of treated, and said we would not touch them for now, and we wouldn't anyway. They look healthy. Well, one person's look healthy, the other one looks healthy-ish. I think another year from now, unfortunately, they're going to look worse. But
So your answer is too late?
I believe it's too late and too many to go out there and treat a bunch of right-of-way trees. We as a city are treating not very many. There's about a half dozen or so ash trees in Hills Park that we did not take out when we cleared out Hills Park because they were in good condition, and those trees have been treated. We did have some trees donated to us from one of the tree services that are going to go back into Hills Park, and we're starting to talk about reforestation in the park board level, and Sam actually sent me some information today on some potential grant funds. So we are starting to look at how do we go forward, but it's not going to come to any surprise to any of you that I say we go forward in the parks. I will never tell you that I think it's a good idea to put trees back in the right-of-way. But again, that is simply just my opinion. You guys will have to make that final decision.
Todd, the Hills Park, does that include around the stockyards where we took all those out or not?
No.
Okay, so is there any talk about that?
The Trails Board has talked to me about that. Actually, Mark Brown told me that he was applying for a grant, I believe, for some more trees in there, and Keith Ralston mentioned it to me as well. So we, between kind of the Park Board, Trail Board, and I guess city staff, had talked about that area and didn't want to try to plant anything back there this year. But I think there's some hope to get something back in there last year, or it's not last year, next year, but much smaller scale than what was in there before. There was 240 trees in there, and they were so overpopulated they were killing each other. We cannot make that mistake again. That's senseless. It's a waste of money, and it's not healthy for the trees themselves. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.
Quick question, Todd. How's the well rehab on our one shallow well yet that we're working on? Have we gotten any?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I should have brought that up. That's actually great news. All wells are able to go back online. So all testing passed. And we, I don't know if I told you guys this or not. We had hired a company to come in and do the disinfection the first time. One of the 2 wells passed. staff being savvy as they are, watched very closely to what they did, and then they called me up and said, man, don't pay them again, we can do that. So we did the second time, so our team, actually, our water department team got the second one to pass without the assistance of a subcontractor, so kudos to them.
Good.
Yep.
Good news. Good. Okay, Tanya, anything further from you?
So just very quick, for SCDC side of the world, the Sheldon Chamber and Development Corp is seeking board member nominations. The deadline to submit those is this month, October 23rd, I believe. So if you are interested in being a board member for our organization or know of someone who would be a good board member, please submit their full name and contact information to me. And just a couple quick things from the chamber, just as you plan ahead for fall. Downtown trick-or-treating will be on October 31st from 4:30 to 5:30, and posters are being delivered to businesses in downtown who are participating, so you should see those up. And during elections, on election day, we will be selling Merry Money until those run out that day. So, yeah, thank you.
Eric, anything from you today?
We've covered quite a few hit and run accidents in the last couple weeks, so we just wanted to, as a police department, just remind everyone to make sure that they're comfortable with their insurance levels, because most of the ones that we've been able to solve have had no insurance, so we believe that's why they ran initially. But and then also the new vehicle that we're replacing the truck that we're giving to EMA. Total Motors let us know that that's being built now, so that vehicle's on its way. So.
Very good. Angie, anything from you?
No, thank you.
Mike, anything further?
No, thank you.
Council to my left?
I do. Last week, we had the household hazardous material trailer out here. We had city staff help us, and then Williams and Company, the CPA firm, also helped with volunteers. That was the biggest collection in history that the landfill has had. We had two Gaylords full of latex paint, one full of oil-based paint, and we had 10 55-gallon drums full of hazardous materials, plus probably 8 totes of spray paint and aerosols. Just huge. So thank for people for participating with that. Took a lot of stuff, hazardous chemicals out of houses. And then next Thursday night, the fire department will be having a burger supper as part of Fire Prevention Week. So that's all I have.
Okay. Either one of you? No further. Council to my right? Certainly.
My apologies for taking up so much of your time, but this is really cool. So it's something actually that these two helped us with too. The new water tower. So we did submit to Tanemic to be part of the Tank of the Year competition. It's a United States-wide competition where people can go in and then you can submit your water towers if you think it's something exceptional, and we believe that ours is exceptional. So we did apply. The deadline to apply was September 27th. Voting will start on October 7th, so real soon here. So when that link becomes available, we'll get you some information out and tell you where to vote, how to vote, and I mean, if the cool part is to me, we get put on a calendar. It's a water tower calendar that I hang in my nerd like that. I hang it in my office every year. It'd be really cool to have a Sheldon water tower in that calendar. So, but we'll need the support of the public to go vote, because it's the way I understand it, it's just based on how many popular votes you get. So fast fingers, vote a lot for Sheldon's water tower.
All right, thank you. And I have nothing further, so take a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Kent.
Aye.
Snyder. Hamel.
Aye.
Ostra. Eggers.